Hi, I'm Vivace Maxvictor. 7 years ago, I left my 12-year career in medicine to pursue my passion for speaking and coaching. Over the past 7 years, I've done over 4,000 coaching calls, and I've heard many courageous and inspiring stories. But up until today, I haven't shared my full story. This is my coming out video. I wasn't publicly ready to share my story for two reasons. First, as an Iranian Jewish woman, I was conditioned to not share my story, and I also feared retribution for doing so in a public domain. I feared social retribution, I feared financial retribution, I feared retribution for my business, and for that reason, I remained silent. The second reason I wasn't prepared to share my story before is because I never wanted my story to be confused with my identity. My story is simply what happened to me. My identity is who I am, and they should not be confused. My intention for sharing my story is to provide liberation for anyone who's suffering. In fact, now I feel responsible to share my story because I wholeheartedly believe that it will save lives. I want to share the story once and only once. Not because I want to deny what happened to me, but because I no longer want to relive the story and empower that story. Instead, I want to stand empowered by the story. I believe that we can transform pain into fuel, and I'm excited to share my story with you. But before I get into my story, I want to share with you my professional and academic background. I did my undergrad in biology, and I hated it. And I continued to go on and get a master's in biology because I didn't know what else to do with myself. I then continued on to Cornell Medical School, where I graduated as a surgical PA. You would wonder if I hated it, why did I continue doing the same thing over and over and over again? Honestly, it's because it was what my brain was wired to do. Starting from childhood, I never learned to pay attention to my own wants and needs. I learned to do what was expected of me and what others thought I should do. Those decisions were fear-based decisions. The true reason why I pursued medicine was I never wanted a man to be able to have physical power and control over me. I didn't follow my heart. I didn't follow my soul because I didn't know how to. For the 12 years I worked in medicine, I was deeply grateful, but I was also greatly unfulfilled. I feel grateful that now I'm doing the work that I love, that's consistent with the extension of my soul, that is authentic to who I am, and it's a natural expression of things that I'm passionate about, things that I care about, things that I think are relevant, and things that I believe will make a huge impact in the world. During the 12 years where I worked in medicine, I went to every personal development seminar that I could find. I read every book, I highlighted, I wrote things in the margin, and what I learned was that there was simply only one thing wrong. What was wrong is I wasn't listening to my heart. After having coached so many people, what I've learned is that the only thing really wrong with anyone is when they don't pay attention to their heart and their soul and what they're really told from the inside to do. Once a person aligns their heart and their mind, they're really powerful. They're shiny, they're beautiful, they're magnetic, and their self-confidence just naturally bubbles to the surface. So now I'm about to share my story. A word of caution, my story is for mature audiences only, so if you're faint of heart and or if you're a minor, I invite you to not watch this video, but for sure go to my other videos. I was born in Iran to a Jewish family. I remember living in Iran during the Islamic Revolution. I remember walking outside of our home and seeing people with machine guns pointed right outside of our home. While I never feared the Islamic regime, I always feared my father's regime. Like many families, we looked very privileged from the outside, but that masked the truth of what was happening on the inside. I grew up with a lot of violence. I grew up with physical abuse, emotional abuse, and also sexual abuse. As well, I witnessed incredible violence against my mother. My father would often tell us that he was going to kill my mother in front of us. And so he would pin her on the floor, and put his knees on her shoulders while punching her in the skull, then strangling her and telling us that he was going to kill her. There was tremendous amount of violence. I remember being in the car, sitting in the back seat of the car. He'd be driving, and he'd grab her hair and start banging it against the passenger window and pulling chunks of her hair out. Events like that were extremely common. Violence against me was also extremely common. Of all the different types of abuse and violence, there is one that hurt me the most. There is one that I could never understand, and I'm willing to be raw and authentic because I believe that the truth has more power than anything else in the world. The event that was most difficult for me to fathom or understand, or yet still to understand today, was how my father would pay my brothers money to beat me. He would literally tell them, "I will give you this amount of money, go beat her up." All the while, I'd be curled up in a ball, shaking and shivering, not knowing when the impending doom was going to happen, when the right price was being offered. If the money wasn't enough, my brothers wouldn't do it. My father would taunt them with more and more money until they would. I'd be in that ball, knowing what was to come. I'd be punched by my brothers. I would be kicked by my brothers. I would be spit on by my brothers. And chunks of my hair would be pulled out. My mother would watch and do nothing. My father would then congratulate my brothers and pay them the money in front of me. And they would celebrate their achievement. I was never able to understand how parents could do this to their own children. When the Michael Vick story came out, and I heard that he used money as a metric to lure people to pit dogs against each other, all I could think of was that happened to me too. Those dogs didn't deserve that. No living creature deserves to be treated that way, and certainly I didn't deserve that. In the coming years, when I asked my mom, "Why didn't you ever protect me?" her response was, "Because I didn't want to get hurt." And later as an adult, I said, "But Mommy, I was just a skinny little girl. Why didn't you do anything?" I did not receive a satisfactory answer. What's really interesting is when I try to hold my father accountable to this, when I brought this up, he told me that later, which is true, he used to pay my brothers money to not beat me. So now he had reverse engineered them, or at least he tried. First, he pays them to beat me, and now he uses money as a tool of manipulation for them not to beat me. It was actually a Jedi mind trick. He wanted me to be grateful that he paid them not to beat me after he had trained them to destroy my soul. On some level, I understand what my brothers did because he would taunt them till they would do it. One of my brothers has since issued a multi-page apology, which has been very healing. Up until even a few years ago when I brought this up with my other brother, he maintains that this is normal. I said, "So all your friends were getting paid to beat up their sisters?" The fact that any human being could think that this is normal, let alone to participate in the ritual abuse of another human being, is heartbreaking.
Here you go, Ajay.
Thank you.
Whenever you're ready.
Thank you. My emotions were not valued. My well-being was not valued. My basic rights as a human being were violated constantly. The people that I would have hoped would have been there for me to love me and to protect me failed to do so. I know many times in life we have expectations from specific people around us. We have hopes that they'll be there for us. What I've learned is that while they might not have the capacity, the proclivity, the inclination, the desire, or the wherewithal to do so, so many people are willing to take a stand for us and to take a stand for our greatness. And that is what makes me believe in humanity and to believe that there's a grace in this universe that is always batting for us, regardless of what the people around us might be doing to us or not doing for us. When I was around the age of 10, my family and I moved to London to escape the Islamic regime, which, as we know, was not the primary regime that I had a problem with. We lived in London for a while, and every day in London I would ask my mom, well, maybe not every day, but a lot of days in London I would ask my mom, Mommy, can we leave today? Mommy, can we leave today? And we didn't leave. Again, if you saw us in London, it looked like we lived really well. For part of that period of time, we lived in a hotel. And I remember that my father had these weird things that he liked to do. The hotel that we were in back then in the day had a rotary phone, and he'd actually bought this device to lock the phone so he couldn't make outgoing calls. Anyway, the bizarreness just continued all the time. It was just garden variety of bizarreness and insanity. Eventually, as a family, we left London and we moved to Los Angeles. We moved to LA at night, and in the morning, my father found another reason to beat my mother up, some perceived infraction as usual. And he said what he had said to her countless times before. He said, if you don't like it, leave. This time, she agreed. Now, she didn't really have any money because for the entire marriage, she had worked for my dad and he had never paid her. My father also told my brothers and I that we had the option to pick which parent we wanted to go with. And this is how he presented the proposal, financially, of course. He said, whoever leaves with your mother gets nothing, and whoever stays with me gets everything. I, of course, packed my bag. The day that I had been waiting for finally came. But of course, at this point, my mom and I were hysterically crying after the violence that had just taken place. While shaking, I packed a little bag together, and my mom and I walked out of the hotel. My father gave me my savings, which were about $100. So my mom and I were in a new country with about my $100. We were staying at the Century Wilshire Hotel. We were in a brand new country, in a brand new city, and we didn't know where we were. We walked outside of the hotel crying hysterically, not knowing which direction to go, and we walked down Wilshire Boulevard. The next hotel was the Holiday Inn. My mom and I walked to the back of the Holiday Inn, and we stood by a payphone where we continued to cry. We didn't know what currency to use. We didn't know how much payphones were. And then a man reached out, I guess, looking at this mother and daughter crying pair. And he gave us a dime. Who knew? This dime would change my life. I traveled all over the world. I had been to private school. And I respected this dime so much. On this dime, it says, "In God we trust." And on this dime, it says, "Liberty." I appreciate this country for what it has offered me. I appreciate this dime for what it did for me. My mom used that dime and called her aunt. I didn't know who her aunt was. She came to the hotel and she picked us up. That woman's name was Amma Ihtiram. Amma means aunt in Farsi. Her name really reflected who she was. Amma Ihtiram was one of the first human beings who I believe ever saw me. I want to thank her and her family for their graciousness. She has since passed. Her kindness has always remained with me. She was kind, she was funny, she was sweet, and she would actually talk to me with love and compassion and interest. We stayed with her and her family for about 2 weeks. And then we went and stayed with my mom's uncle for about 2 weeks. And then we still had nowhere to go. And we had no money. And we had no ID because my father kept our identification. But thank God this was way before 9/11, so we could actually get on a plane. We got on a plane and came to New York, where we lived with my mom's brother, my uncle, in a one-bedroom apartment. It was one bedroom with this little side area in Queens, New York. I'm also very grateful that my uncle opened up his house to us and generously allowed us to live with him. I'm sure he wasn't so keen as a bachelor to be living with a grown woman and her 12-year-old daughter. My mother and I used to sleep on the carpet. What was really exciting about this was that I actually felt safe sleeping, falling asleep. Between the ages of 12 and the time I went to college, I skipped a grade, so I went to college when I was 17. I actually never had a mattress. One of my cousins at one point in time built me a wooden bed. And this wooden bed, which was a single bed, kind of fit into that extra little room that they called my room, which was more of a storage space. I went to 8th grade at Russell Sage in Queens, so shout out to Russell Sage. And then I continued to go to high school at Cardozo High School in Bayside in Queens. After high school, I went to college. And as we know, I studied bio and then got my master's. And honestly, a huge pivotal point for me was when Cornell Medical School extended an invitation for me to be a part of the surgical PA program. I owe a debt of gratitude to that school for what it taught me and for who I became. I know with 1,000% certainty that my coaching practice would not be as successful as it is had it not been for the discipline and education and training that the Cornell Medical Program provided me. So shout out to you too. Thank you so much. The only problem with going to Cornell was the $90,000 student loan that I now felt saddled with. I worked days, I worked nights, literally, I worked all night long. I understand people would do the night shift. I worked days, I worked nights, I worked weekends to pay back what I called the student loan hostage crisis. At the time, I was proud of myself because I thought I had such an incredible work ethic. What I failed to recognize at the time was that the entire time I was working in medicine, I failed to take into consideration my thoughts, my feelings, and my needs. While I was very grateful to work in medicine and to finally have my own income so that no man could control me, there was one major problem with this equation. I was not happy. I was not fulfilled. And now looking back, I wonder, what's the point of achievement without fulfillment? It literally doesn't make sense to me. And I've since made the decision to never, ever, ever value achievement over fulfillment again. So here I was with this incredible education that gave me carte blanche to anything that I wanted to do. And we had one major problem. The problem was that I wasn't fulfilled. I wasn't fulfilled and I wasn't happy. I had never learned how to be happy. I had never learned how to be fulfilled. I had never dealt with my family of origin trauma. I had never dealt with the fact that here I was forcing myself to study things that I had no interest in. Anyway, I never dealt with my issues, obviously. I just kept shoving them under the carpet. What I had learned to do was to deny my feelings. What I had learned to do was to ignore my feelings. What I had learned to do really well was to repress my feelings. During the time that I worked in medicine, some events took place having nothing to do with the work itself on a personal level that also really impacted my self-confidence and my feeling of self-worth. I feel really uncomfortable discussing this, as if it was comfortable discussing the other stuff, but I feel really uncomfortable discussing this. But I believe it's necessary to do so to give you a full picture of what my mental state was at that time. I was raped on 3 separate occasions, and each time it happened, I held myself accountable. The first time it happened with a person that I knew. And I excused it because I figured I was drinking and he was drinking. And then I thought to myself, he probably didn't know what he was doing, even though I was extremely verbally clear. The second time it happened, I had met a gentleman and I hadn't even kissed him. This time I also blamed myself for having had some wine. But in truth, I would have never been able to physically defend myself against someone of his stature. He was a very tall football player type of guy. I didn't stand a chance. I let that event go too because I blamed myself. I figured maybe if I didn't have a drink, I would have been able to escape from the room. The third time it happened, I was drugged. This time, I didn't blame myself because I knew fully well that there's nothing that I could have said or done that could have warranted someone having done this to me. And in fact, the person that I woke up with, I don't believe, and to this day I don't believe, was the person who drugged me. I have 100% certainty in my heart and soul that it was his friend. I remember waking up with a raging headache. My eyes were completely bloodshot red. I couldn't hold my head up. I was just holding my head, trying to open up my eyes. And I told him, I said I was drugged. And he said, yes, I thought you were on drugs. And I said, wait a second. It's a Sunday night, I was in my neighborhood, I don't even do drugs. I wasn't on drugs, I was actually drugged. I couldn't remember what had happened, but as I looked around the room, there were empty condom wrappers all around the room. I looked at him in disbelief and asked him how many people were here. He said it was just me. I said, okay. I didn't know what to believe. Then he proceeded to tell me every single thing he had done to me that night. Again, in my heart, I didn't hold him accountable because I didn't believe that he's the one who drugged me. I went home. I told my mother. She said, okay. No rape kit, no tox screen, nothing. After this event, I was afraid to walk down the block and go to a neighborhood place. Literally, I was never the same after that event. I couldn't understand what had happened. Now the impact of the energy and the crescendo, everything that I had ignored had come to a head. I could no longer shove things under the carpet. I could no longer use my mind to avoid my truth. Soon after this event, my cup of avoidance and denial ran over, and I literally became suicidal. I know the suicide or being suicidal is portrayed a certain way in the media, and I don't know what anyone else's experience is of it, but I can share with you what my experience was. It was like waking up in the morning with this spiritual jackhammer that got louder and louder and louder by the second. It was intolerable pain. It was more pain than anything I'd ever felt before, and I didn't know how to make it go away. So the only way that I could think of making it go away was if I went away. I don't believe that people want to kill themselves. Speaking for myself, I wanted to kill the pain. I didn't want to kill myself, but I didn't know how to kill the pain without killing myself. Coming from a goal-setting mindset, I gave myself to a certain date. I literally picked my own expiration date. And knowing that I worked in medicine, I had access to every controlled substance and narcotic that one could want. I picked the date, I had the means, I had the motivation, and so I wanted to be responsible to my cats. I went to my grandmother and I said, Grandma, I'm going to kill myself. Can you please take care of my cats, Max and Prince? And my grandma said no. And according to Iranian culture, you're not supposed to ask something like this of a grandparent. They're not supposed to be cleaning cat litter. So I already knew that. I then went to my mom. I felt I was being very methodical about this. I went to my mom and I said to my mom, Mommy, I'm going to kill myself. Will you please take care of Max and Prince? And she said, no, I don't want the responsibility. That's all she said. She never asked me why I felt that way. She never provided any opportunity for help. She never asked me what had happened. She never asked me if I wanted to discuss my feelings. She didn't want the responsibility of taking care of my cats. I then went to my neighbor, and I told my neighbor, and I said the same thing. She agreed to take care of Max and Prince. At that time, I was too broken to know how to fend for myself. At that time, I was just numb. I had no more feelings. That was the hardest period of my life. Those days up to my expiration date. Grace saved my life. Grace, I hope and pray that if you're going through anything, and I know that everybody's going through something, everybody has some sort of pain, everybody has some sort of worry, everybody has some sort of fear and anxiety. My hope and prayer for you is so that you can meet grace too, so that you can allow grace to intercede on your behalf at times where you may not be capable of doing so. A few days before my self-determined expiration date, I had heard about a place that did a brain scan, and I thought as a last-ditch effort, I can go to this clinic and get a brain scan done and see if there's any way to help my situation. I remember getting on that plane and having a panic attack, being so scared, feeling so empty, feeling so disconnected from anyone and everything around me. I had multiple brain scans done, and they measured the blood flow in the brain. And what the doctor was able to show me, that regions of my brain were specifically hyperactive. For the first time, I felt validated. For the first time, I didn't blame myself. I realized it was something that was happening in my brain, and I remember asking, so you don't think I'm just being negative? And the person's like, you're not being negative, this is actually in your brain. I think coming from a science background, being accustomed to so much denial, I needed evidence. I needed something to show me scientifically that this was something that maybe could be healed. What helped me to heal was learning to hear my truth, learning to speak my truth, and learning to obey my truth. The more I did it, the more I healed. The more my brain and heart came into natural balance and harmony, the more empowered I felt and the more alive I felt. I feel grateful for the opportunity that grace afforded me. I feel grateful for the opportunity to be here. I feel grateful for the opportunity of every single client who trusts me to hear their story and to also help them reframe their story so that they can take their power back from anything that's ever happened to them, so that they can stand in the light, in the power, in the grace, in the beauty of who they are. I believe that PTSD is real, but I also believe that post-traumatic growth is real. We need to speak more about post-traumatic growth, what is possible when we learn to channel our pain into power. I don't know what you've been through, but I can tell you that I understand pain, I understand disappointment, I understand hurt, I understand frustration, I understand not feeling good enough, I understand feeling insecure, I understand feeling inadequate. And I also understand that we can defy the odds. I believe that there is so much power in our spirit, that when we learn to bridge the gap between our heart and our mind, when we learn to stand in alignment for what is possible, magic can happen. I believe the name of the game is self-mastery. The name of the game is for us to take personal responsibility as adults for our well-being. First and foremost, I believe we need to stop the self-attack. We need to give up this learned self-helplessness. And I want the world to go on fire with hashtag no self-pity. Let's stand in our grace and our power. Let's stand in our strength. Let's stand united in the power that we have to defy precedent. I believe we can defy precedent. I believe we must defy precedent. I look forward to hearing your story of how you've defied precedent. Having done over 4,000 coaching calls, I've heard all kinds of stories. I've heard all kinds of stories about pain, anguish, and difficult times. I want you to know that I am never discounting your pain. I validate your pain, but My job is to emphasize your power. I stand for your greatness. I will empower your greatness. I refuse to empower your weakness. And I'm excited for the road ahead of you. Let's defy our story. Let's have our identity be bigger than our story can ever be. Let's make this trauma of our past, the story of our past, a footnote in who we are and not headline news. I believe there's a luxury in every human being. I call it the luxury of being you. I believe that there's a treasure box built already within each of us. And our job in this lifetime is to find our treasure box and to open it up and to share what's in that treasure box, first with ourselves and with the rest of humanity. And I look forward to the opportunity of celebrating the luxury of you being you with you. I'm Vivace Maxvictor, and I thank you for listening.